this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to my beloved daughter.
Nobody in the room had any clue why there was a second crown sitting right next to King Charles. Then, out of nowhere, the king stands up, calls Catherine over, and drops an announcement that completely blew everyone's minds about where the royal family was heading. And look, this wasn't just some fake title or a quick temp job, it was a total game changer. Before anyone in the country could even process what they were looking at, Charles lifted that crown with shaking hands and officially named her the new boss of the crown. Now, before we break down what this actually means for the royals, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Catherine froze. She locked eyes with William from across the room, and the future king just gave her a quick, subtle nod back. She walked up to that empty chair. Now, Buckingham Palace had called this whole thing a final national address, basically the king's last big formal speech to the nation. But nobody bothered to explain why there was a second seat, or why Camilla was sitting way off to the side. Charles lifted this special ceremonial crown, the one that basically gives you full control over the family's public duties, keeping everyone in line and how the royals represent the country. But before he could even put it down, his hands started shaking like crazy. Catherine reached out and held his wrist steady, which showed you just how heavy this whole moment really was. William watched it all go down, knowing his wife wasn't taking his spot as next in line. But she was getting the kind of real power that would reshape the monarchy way before he ever got to sit on the throne. The king set the crown on her head and declared Catherine the official new boss of the crown, giving her the ultimate say on public duties, settling family drama, and deciding how the House of Windsor presents itself to the world. You could see Camilla's face completely drop. The queen consort found out right along with everyone else that this new setup left her with zero power, no veto rights behind closed doors, and no guarantee she'd even have a seat at the table moving forward. Then Charles dropped another bombshell. The official proclamation had been signed and sealed earlier that morning. A royal proclamation is a big deal official document backed by the king's total authority, meaning no amount of family drama behind closed doors could undo it now. Catherine looked down. William stood there like a statue. Camilla looked over at her husband. But he wouldn't even look back at her. The whole hall went dead silent until the king took his hand off Catherine's shoulder and tossed his prepared speech to the side. The future has to be led by someone with strength, not someone chasing power, he said. The room erupted, applause started soft, and then turned into a roar. But Princess Anne wasn't even looking at the crown. She spotted a sealed red folder sitting right under her brother's chair, the one holding the real secret reason he picked Catherine over every other senior royal. The crown itself was just for show. The real bombshell was what this whole thing was about to cost Catherine, William, Charles, and the woman who just got pushed way out of the inner circle. To the rest of the world watching, it was a massive historic passing of the torch. But for the four people right next to the throne, it was pure agony. Catherine got bumped up with zero warning. William had to stand there and watch his wife handed the kind of authority usually kept for a future king. Camilla got publicly sidelined. And Charles just gave away the one last big job that made him feel like he actually mattered. Behind those calm faces, 4 brutal private battles were already kicking off. Catherine carried the crown into a private back room and set it down real gentle on a narrow table. Being the Princess of Wales meant she was the heir's wife, but this brand new role gave her instant control over where the monarchy was headed, even while William stayed next in line for the throne, the fixed setup for who takes over next. She pressed both hands against the wood table and listened to the door click shut behind them. William didn't say a word at first. He got that his wife wasn't stealing his crown, but the power she just landed was going to rewrite the rules for the whole family before his own reign even started. Catherine finally turned around and asked real quietly if the speech had humiliated him, and you could hear the pure fear in her voice. She'd taken on Charles's trust, but she couldn't live with the thought that it might have crushed her husband. The prince shook his head, admitting that feeling humiliated wasn't what scared him. What really terrified him was watching Catherine inherit the exact same soul-crushing pressure that destroyed his mother. The non-stop media scrutiny, impossible public expectations, and that brutal demand to look completely unfazed while your personal agony gets picked apart by the entire country. William stepped closer, though he stayed clear of the crown. She looked into his eyes and realized his silence was never about holding a grudge. It was straight-up panic. Charles had spent weeks quietly cutting back on his public events, but only Anne and 2 inner-circle advisors knew his final outing was actually a handoff of real power. The king kept the whole thing under wraps, because he knew even a single leak could spark massive pushback inside the family before Catherine was officially locked in by the signed proclamation. Camilla took an even bigger hit 12 hours after finding out her name was wiped from the final draft. An earlier version actually had the queen consort right next to her husband as a key advisor, but the final paperwork left her with 0 leverage. She read that updated page alone, folded it once, and pressed her hand over it. Charles didn't just tweak a few words, he completely rewritten her future. Anne walked into the back room right after William asked why on earth Catherine was picked. The Princess Royal laid it out straight. The decision wasn't about popularity contests, loud applause, or public adoration. She explained that the king chose Catherine because she passed a secret test every single senior royal had bombed. When William demanded to know when this test even happened, Anne glanced at the crown and dropped a single date. The night of the Windsor Founders' ceremony 6 months ago, to the outside world, that ceremony seemed totally uneventful. But one explosive showdown behind locked doors pushed Charles into making the most drastic move of his entire reign. Catherine's path to taking charge didn't start with crowd cheers, public love, or some master succession plan. It started 6 months prior, when she stood her ground alone in front of King Charles and gave a hard no to a direct royal command. That argument lasted under 20 minutes. But it completely changed the way the king looked at everyone around him. What looked like straight-up defiance was actually the moment Charles realized who would step up to protect the crown when doing the right thing meant disobeying orders. Catherine had walked into the Windsor Founders' ceremony expecting the usual fake-it-till-you-make-it show of family unity, just a private royal meeting where senior family members rubber-stamped future duties. But hidden under all that fancy official wording was a strategy designed to quietly ice out several younger royals from doing any real work. Charles thought this plan would shield the monarchy from scandals and messy PR. Catherine saw it for what it really was. A cold punishment handed down with 0 proof, no explanation, and 0 chance for those involved to defend themselves. The king called her into his private study right after the event. He slapped the paperwork down in front of her and told her to sign it. Catherine read the last page, shut the folder, and slowly pushed it right back to his side of the desk. She looked him in the eye and said she wasn't putting her name on a decision that would tear the family apart under the excuse of protecting it. Even with no one else in the room, Charles took that refusal like a slap in the face. The king blasted her for undermining his authority right when he needed everyone in line. Catherine's hands were shaking, but her voice didn't waver for a second. She told him that keeping quiet and obeying orders might buy silence. But it would never earn back trust once innocent people were thrown under the bus without a fair shot. Then she walked out, rattled, but refusing to back down. William later spilled the real fallout during a private recorded chat saved in the family archives. His wife was fully ready to get stripped of her patronages, lose her access, and give up future perks instead of caving in. She never ran to the press, never played the victim, and never used the fight to make Charles look bad. The future king saw clearly that her silence actually protected the very man whose orders she had just shot down. The next morning, everything flipped upside down. Charles got a full internal report showing that 2 of his advisors had actually hidden evidence and blown risks way out of proportion just to push that plan through. The king realized Catherine standing her ground had saved him from making a massive mistake and called out the snakes inside his own circle. He called her back into the library. No formal apology, but he looked her in the eye and asked if she would have still stood up to him if William had backed the plan. Catherine didn't flinch. Yes, she said, because the crown can't demand things it would be embarrassed to explain. Charles didn't say a word, but right then and there, he started drafting a secret leadership document, one focused on good judgment instead of blind loyalty. He thought he kept it completely under wraps, but Camilla caught wind of it pretty fast. And once the Queen realized Catherine was being considered for power no royal wife had ever touched before, that behind-the-scenes tension turned into a full-blown war for Charles's final sign-off. The palace had lived through fights over titles, estates, money, and loyalty, but this was a whole different animal. Camilla wasn't just fighting for some flashy title. She was fighting to stop a future where Catherine became the single most influential woman in the royal family. No aides, no staff, doors locked, just the two of them facing off in a dead-silent drawing room. Neither raised her voice at first, but by the time that meeting wrapped up, their relationship was smashed to pieces for good. Camilla was the one who called the meeting after finding out Charles was cooking up a leadership proclamation for Catherine. Now, a proclamation carries the king's total authority, but the queen consort hadn't seen the final fine print. She only knew an older draft had her front and center in the whole handoff. Catherine agreed to meet one-on-one, no William, no palace PR, thinking one real conversation might keep this drama from leaking and wrecking the family in public. The queen sized her up before laying into her. She accused Catherine of playing the long game, acting all humble and reluctant, while secretly soaking up power. Camilla claimed that quiet, composed routine made her way more dangerous than any openly ambitious courtier. Saying people only trusted Catherine because she never looked thirsty for power, yet power just kept falling into her lap. Catherine sat there and took it. But that accusation stung, big time, mainly because she had never asked for the job that was now tearing everyone apart. Catherine fired back that she hadn't asked Charles for a single thing, and she wasn't about to apologize for being trusted when the king felt the monarchy was on shaky ground. Then the Princess of Wales dropped a bombshell of her own. She had actually begged Charles to rethink the whole thing. But Charles wouldn't budge, telling her that a split court was trying to hijack the handoff before William could even take the throne. That's when Camilla totally lost her cool. She pulled out an old, abandoned draft showing that Charles had originally named her senior guardian of the crown, a top dog position meant to run the family's public side, with Catherine working under her. The queen shoved her chair back so hard it slammed right into the wall, demanding to know if Catherine was trying to steal her spot next to the king. Catherine didn't back down an inch. "No," she said. "I'm going to stand wherever duty puts me, even when it's miserable." Their raised voices spilled right out into the hallway. Charles walked in out of nowhere, took one look at his wife, then at Catherine, and realized the silent war in his house had finally hit the boiling point. Camilla demanded to know if that old draft meant nothing to him now. The king just looked at her and said it only showed a time when he thought blind loyalty was enough to save the future. Now he knew good judgment mattered way more. Charles dropped the news right then. The final proclamation was getting signed before sunrise. The queen walked out without saying another word, shutting the door behind her with a heavy, cold slam. The king turned to Catherine and laid it on the line. He warned her that pushback from the family wasn't even the biggest problem. The real danger was the hardcore legal power packed inside that document. Charles wasn't just handing her some fake title for show. Anyone who actually knew how this stuff worked understood it had the juice to completely rewrite how the monarchy operated long before William ever got to sit on the throne. The crown sitting on Catherine's head was styled to look purely ceremonial, but the paperwork behind it was a whole different story. Tucked away inside Charles's final decree were legal powers that gave her the say over who gets to represent the royals, who gets a seat in the inner circle, and which royal charities would even make the cut during the upcoming handoff. The throne was still the king's, and the future throne still belonged to William. But the day-to-day steering of the whole operation had just been handed off to Catherine. Catherine's brand new title was Leader of the Crown, a specific setup that split managing the family and public duties away from the king's official constitutional role. Charles was still king, William was still next in line, But Catherine was now running the show on coordinating top-tier duties, approving big charitable strategies, squashing internal family drama, and deciding who could actually be trusted to speak for the king in public. That difference was massive. One title carried the crown itself, while the other controlled the engine running everything behind the scenes. William saw the red flags right away. The future king was terrified this job would throw his wife right into the firing line, taking the kind of hits usually reserved for the reigning monarch. But without any of the official legal shields or absolute power that come with being king, Catherine was going to carry a massive load with zero armor. He pulled Charles aside and told him straight up that this position was going to make her the target for every single grudge in the family. The king didn't even argue. Before dawn, he admitted to Anne that dumping this kind of pressure on Catherine felt straight up cruel. He knew she'd get dragged for every suspension, every new hire, and every single public move she made. But to him, leaving the monarchy to run wild without someone he actually trusted was 10 times worse. Without a steady hand at the wheel, warring factions inside the family would rip the institution apart before William ever got his shot at the throne. Anne stood right there as her brother signed off on the final page. As the sun started coming up, the Princess Royal caught him freezing right before the last letter of his name, his hand just hanging over the paper. She laid her palm flat next to the sheet without actually touching him. Charles finished signing, but that split second hesitate said what words couldn't. He knew this decision was going to hit the people he loved, right where it hurts. The fine print hidden inside made things even more cutthroat. One clause gave Catherine the power to pull any senior royal off public duty if their mess-ups threatened to destroy the public's trust in the family. Another clause made sure the role wouldn't just automatically pass down to Camilla, William, or any future royal spouse. The position could only keep going if a written decree proved it was earned through real service, sharp judgment, and a track record of restraint. Charles slammed the official royal seal onto the proclamation, the big rubber stamp proving it came straight from the king, and then passed the pen over to Anne. He told her to break the seal so nobody could ever use it for another order again, and she snapped it right in half over a silver tray. And then came a crazy twist. Before the ceremony even kicked off, an unsigned copy of the document vanished straight out of the private office. Nobody had any idea who pinched it, but within hours, the shock waves of Catherine's new power were already bouncing around the palace walls. The official speech only lasted a few minutes, but by the time the royals walked out of the hall, doors were slamming shut, calendars were getting wiped, and one person had already been thrown off Catherine's very first committee. The first real sign of this whole new setup didn't come from another formal speech. It came when a single chair was pulled right out of a conference room. Within an hour of Catherine being crowned, the staff got brand new marching orders. All royal events were put on ice. And the private council that used to revolve around Charles and Camilla got totally reshuffled. Every single move sent the exact same signal. This wasn't just PR fluff. Catherine was handed real deal power. And the old way of doing things in the palace was dead and buried before anyone could even protest. Catherine called her first big leadership meeting that night, bringing in William, Anne, Edward, and a tight group of advisors who actually had real jobs to do. This inner council was the core team running the royal operation, and from here on out, getting a seat at the table was about what you actually did, not your royal title or who you were married to. She also put a 48-hour freeze on every single approved announcement, a clutch move to stop rival factions from pulling fast ones during the shuffle, rushing through backroom appointments, or grabbing power before the dust settled. Camilla walked up expecting her usual spot right next to Charles. The queen consort froze dead in her tracks when she saw her name wasn't on the list, and her chair was straight up gone. For a few long seconds, she just stood there in total silence. The king watched his wife process getting iced out, but he didn't say a word to fix it. That silence hit her harder than any public statement ever could, proving Charles was ready to back Catherine's authority, even if it wrecked his own marriage. The queen turned right around and walked away without stepping foot inside. Back in her private lounge, she unpinned the brooch Charles had given her when he first took the throne and set it down next to an unopened copy of the proclamation. She kept her hand over that piece of jewelry for a second. Like that tiny pin held every single promise he made before all her power started sliding away. Catherine walked into the council room and spotted the awkward empty space right away. The new leader called for another chair to be brought in, refusing to let Camilla getting cut turn into a public petty spectacle, though she didn't actually invite her back in. Her very first executive move wasn't even about the Queen. Instead, she ordered a full-on investigation into the stolen document and put a hard ban on anyone deleting emails, shredding papers, or messing with IT security logs. William looked over the security report and felt the air sucked right out of the room. The missing copy had been pulled using his personal office login, the digital ID used to sign off on things in his name. The future king knew exactly what that meant. Someone was actively trying to set him up, making him look disloyal to his own wife before her very first meeting was even over. Anne told everyone to cool their jets, while Edward warned that a fake paper trail could tear the family apart way faster than any press leak. Catherine sat there listening quietly, keeping her eyes locked right on William. He held off until the advisors cleared out and the heavy doors clicked shut. The prince finally looked at her and asked the one question neither of them had dared to touch since the crown hit her head. Do you actually trust me? Look, the monarchy could live through a messy public power struggle, but it was never going to survive if Charles's last big move planted a seed of doubt between the future king and the woman picked to run things by his side. When the doors were finally locked up tight and every last advisor had cleared out, there was no king, no future monarch, and no newly crowned leader left in the room. It was just William and Catherine, a husband and wife standing on opposite sides of a choice neither of them had ever asked for. For the first time all day, she came clean and admitted she was scared stiff. And for the first time, he owned up to the fact that a part of him was salty about finding out about Charles's big move, right along with the rest of the world. William stayed over by the door while Catherine stood right next to the closed crown case. No aides, no paperwork, and no flashy ceremonial props between them. The future king laid it out. Even though he got the big picture reason for her new job, the whole secrecy thing had really stung. Charles had robbed him of the chance to prep, back her up, or even just comfort his wife before she got thrown straight to the wolves under the public spotlight. Catherine dropped her voice, coming clean that the king had only filled her in literally minutes before the ceremony, and made her swear on her life not to tell a soul, not even William. She went along with it because Charles was terrified the decision would get shot down before it was officially locked in. But she totally saw the fallout that secret had caused. Her own husband was forced to process her taking charge with the whole world watching his every facial expression. The prince finally let it all out, confessing that keeping him in the dark made him feel less like her partner and more like some threat to her leadership. He had to stand there watching all this power slide over to Catherine, wondering if the palace actually thought he was going to try and sabotage her. She told him her own nightmare was something completely different. Turning Charles down right now would leave the monarchy totally lost without a rudder, but saying yes might end up building a rival camp around her, a whole separate power hub competing with the future king. Then William broke down what the security team actually dug up. The office code used to pull that missing document came from an old, dust-collecting computer terminal that a bunch of senior staff members could easily jump on. An office code was just a generic digital pass linked to the household, not receipts proving the prince himself did anything. That finding cleared his name completely, but it also proved somebody behind the scenes was desperately trying to drive a wedge between them. Catherine popped the case open, picked up the crown of leadership, and held it right out to her husband, telling him she'd give it right back if he thought it was coming between them. William stared at the crown, gently shut the lid, and pushed the case right back over to her. He told her the heavy load itself wasn't the enemy, the secrecy was. Catherine promised that every single major move would be hashed out behind closed doors before it ever hit the council table, and William backed her up, agreeing that neither of them would demand blind loyalty when their gut told them otherwise. Their marriage was only going to pull through if being real with each other mattered more than royal rank. By morning, they were ready to step out together as a united front. But then, boom, that missing proclamation hit the internet, showing everyone the insane amount of power Charles had just handed to Catherine, even though they were completely on the same page behind closed doors. A single front-page headline outside the palace turned a private royal transition into a full-blown national reckoning. By sunrise, the secret text of the proclamation was out in the wild. The entire country realized Catherine hadn't just snagged some fancy honor, she'd been given real deal. Active control over the royal family. Massive crowds started forming. Major TV networks broke into their regular shows, and headlines everywhere were declaring a brand new royal era. But beneath all the hype and celebration, a much deeper question started brewing, not about whether people loved Catherine, but whether Charles had just permanently rewritten the rules of the monarchy. Catherine read the first news blasts in total silence. That leaked copy spelled out her direct grip over public events, family PR, major charity moves, and internal family rules. This was heavy-duty authority. It meant she got to choose who spoke for the firm, which causes got the royal green light, and how the family would handle PR fires down the road. This was no fake trophy job. It put real, hard executive power right in her lap before William ever touched the throne. Palace PR scrambled and dropped the full, uncut proclamation within the hour. Leaking the whole thing stopped people from picking out random quotes and spinning wild rumors that Catherine was trying to steal her husband's spot or take over the government. William was still the undisputed next king, period. But now the public got the message loud and clear. His wife was calling the shots day to day. Even with all the love rushing in from the public, the celebration quickly went sour. TV pundits started talking trash, claiming Catherine getting promoted was proof Charles didn't trust his own son anymore, a nasty rumor that poked right at the exact fear William and Catherine had just worked through in private. The future king was not about to let that storyline take off. He insisted on walking shoulder to shoulder with her for their very first public walkabout, knowing that even a tiny bit of space between them would be parsed as proof of a cold war in the palace. It was pouring rain outside Buckingham Palace as hundreds squeezed under umbrellas. A newspaper vendor held up a front page with Catherine's picture under the massive headline, "Charles's Final Crown, Catherine to lead the House of Windsor," right down the street. A news anchor was live on air calling the move a passing of active leadership without anyone stepping down, while constantly reminding viewers that the prince was still next in line for the crown. Then Princess Anne broke her silence with a pre-recorded statement straight from the palace. The Princess Royal set the record straight, confirming the king started drafting this whole plan after Catherine put her foot down over the Windsor framework mess. That single statement flipped the whole narrative on its head. What haters were calling a greedy power grab was suddenly seen for what it really was, pure moral courage. It showed the world that Catherine earned Charles's trust by standing up to him when just nodding along would have wrecked the family. Charles stood behind a palace window, watching the crowds chant down below. Hearing Catherine's name echoing through the rain, he turned quietly to Anne. "They get why I picked her," he said. She looked at him and said softly, "They only get part of it. The big picture still belongs to Catherine." Before the royals stepped out into the spotlight together, Catherine had one last massive call to make. Would her very first speech be about defending her new title, or explaining why Charles just handed off his ultimate authority? When Catherine finally stepped up to the mic, she didn't brag about winning, show off her new power, or throw shade at her haters. Instead, she laid down the ultimate vision for this whole new chapter of the monarchy. She stood right there in front of the nation without a crown on her head, choosing to leave it sitting inside the palace. Her very first move as leader wasn't about flexing her rank. It was about defining what real leadership looks like. Charles was sitting close by, looking totally wiped out, but totally at peace. William was right there by her side, solid as a rock. Camilla watched from a distance, keeping her composure, and Anne stayed right behind the king. In that single moment, all the petty drama, old grudges, and private beef completely dissolved next to one huge question. What kind of royal family was actually going to survive all this? Catherine started off by making it crystal clear that William was still the future king, period, and that her brand new job was strictly there to back him up and make his future reign stronger, not to clash with it. While the king holds the official throne under the law, her position was all about running the day-to-day side of the royal family. She swore that from here on out, real service would be judged by how you act, how consistent you are, and whether the public trusts you, not by fancy titles, who you married, or how close you sit to power. William listened as his wife called out the massive load Charles's decision had dumped onto their family. The future king reached out and took her hand, instantly shutting down any trash talk that this move had driven a wedge between them. Catherine squeezed his fingers back, sending a clear message to the world. They were in this as 100% equal partners, building no split factions and never letting silence ruin their marriage. Camilla didn't move a muscle as Catherine looked her way. The queen consort knew this whole new setup put an end to her pulling the strings on where the family was heading, but Catherine refused to turn that loss into some petty public humiliation. She gave a genuine shout-out to Camilla for sticking by Charles through years of endless duties and crazy uncertainty. The queen bowed her head, quietly taking in a future she wasn't calling the shots on anymore. Then Catherine dropped her very first official order. Every single major internal move from here on out needed paper receipts explaining why, stopping shady behind-the-scenes advisors from running the show in secret. She also gave a real voice back to any royals hit by family restrictions, making sure nobody could get iced out without a reason or get denied a chance to state their case. The mess that kicked off at the Windsor Founders Ceremony was finally wiped clean. King Charles stood up real slow as the speech wrapped up. He grabbed Catherine's hand with both of his and bowed his head, not like a reigning king giving up his throne, but like a proud father-in-law acknowledging that his final mission was accomplished. Anne watched her brother finally lay down the heavy burden he'd been lugging around for so long, while William stayed right beside the woman, picked to navigate the road ahead. The king officially stepped back from running the daily show, while keeping his legal spot as monarch completely intact. William kept right on prepping to be king, and Catherine took on the heavy responsibility of steering the family through the crazy years coming down the pipe. Look, Charles's last big move was never about shunning his son, taking a shot at Camilla, or handing out a popularity prize. It was a deep-down admission that the crown needed somebody willing to call out power without ever thirsting for it herself. Catherine taking charge was the moment earned trust totally beat out inherited clout, and the royal family realized leadership wasn't being ripped away from them. It was put right where sacrifice had already proved it belonged. And as King Charles walked off the public stage for the absolute last time, Catherine didn't stand in front of the crown or hide behind it. She stood right, dead center, holding its entire future with William right by her side, and the monarchy was finally brought together around a leader who had never asked to rule in the first place. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.